Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. It's been since episode 22 when we talked about unconscious bias with Michelle Maldanado. And if you're a regular listener, you know that we have numerous conversations on women in manufacturing. An area where maybe I'm more uncomfortable, maybe I haven't talked about it more, is the whole space around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And it's always good to meet friends that make you feel a little uncomfortable, but make you feel okay having the conversation while you learn. Because that's how we learn, is by listening to this podcast, talking after. And I am fortunate to have met Reggie Davis from Memphis, Tennessee. And he, like Michelle, goes around and helps others have these conversations in this space. And he caught my attention when he said, Trevor, this is like technology 40 years ago, and you got to be talking about this. So welcome, Reggie. And where does that comparison come from?
Thanks, Trevor. It comes from a space of when I look back at technology as a guy who probably didn't embrace technology and still doesn't embrace it as much as I should, but I think back to the early days of technology and people being afraid of it, not really engaging it. And then I think about the companies who had an opportunity to engage technology and didn't quite do it for whatever their reasons were. And now they are not around, right? So with all due respect to these companies, but Kodak, Blockbuster, renting DVDs, Sears Roebuck, and even in the manufacturing world, Bethlehem, right? Bethlehem Steel Company. They did not engage. They did not integrate technology as they should have. And I think today that is what diversity and inclusion and equity is. There are companies who have made a decision that, hey, we're going to talk about it a little bit, but we're not really going to engage it. We're not going to embrace it. We're not going to authentically integrate it into our culture and into our policies. And I think those companies could be looking back 30 to 40 years from now, and not be around potentially.
Yeah, would you say, because you work with manufacturers as I do, and really it's whether there's somebody in leadership that is starting the conversation, because there's nothing to, like technology maybe 40 years ago in some manufacturing plants, there's nothing to say, hey, you need to be doing this, or there's nothing to kind of kick this off. So when you see organizations starting to get ahead of it, what's the characteristics of those organizations? What are they doing different?
Great question. I think about companies who have strong leadership. Now, let's be honest, in 2020, a lot of companies did a lot of talk about DEI, and they did a lot of, I would say, some superficial work towards DEI. They hired a chief diversity officer, had some workshops and some training sessions, and now they've moved on to business as usual. But when you find those organizations, those companies, those enterprises who are willing to be courageous enough to move this work forward, not just in talk, but to say, even if it costs us some teammates or employees or staff members, we know that this is the right thing. And diversity and inclusion and equity, it is the right thing to do, whether you're a manufacturing company or a school or even a church.
I always say, if you have to say the words, well, that's Trevor, he's just like that, then you know there's probably something deeper to that, right? If they're making excuses maybe for someone's behavior maybe that they don't recognize and they're not addressing, is that something that you see?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. A lot of it, going back to Michelle, right? It's unconscious. It's things that people don't see in themselves unless it is brought to their attention at times. And let's be honest, even when it's brought to their attention, our natural human instinct is to become defensive, push back. And I'm not talking about what I've seen in someone else. I'm talking about what I've experienced myself. When my wife has challenged me and asked me questions of, why did you just say what you said? Why did you just make that joke? Do you realize, Reggie, that could be hurtful to someone else? And this was early in our marriage. It was a challenge for me, right? It challenged me, but she also challenged me in love. And I know we're talking about manufacturing companies, but it's this sense of caring, because most companies will say, we care about our staff, we care about our employees. But then what type of culture are you cultivating to really show that you care beyond the work that they do? But you care about the person. You care about how they identify. You care about them being able to bring them their full selves.
So when I hear, this is a good one too, about bringing your full self. And then I hear, well, I don't want everyone to bring them their full selves. Where's the fine line there? I mean, that's for another podcast. I don't know.
That is a podcast in and of itself. But here's the challenge of when we make that statement. We want people to bring their full selves. I want someone to bring their full selves, but also thinking about those around. Like, I care about who I am, and I want to bring my full self to work. But if my full self is rude,
Yeah.
if my full self is truly offensive, not in terms of who I am, but how I treat someone else, how I speak to someone else. You know, I think a workplace should be a place where a very conservative person and a very progressive person should be able to work together in harmony. Harmony means that we're not playing the same note, but we're playing two notes that aren't in conflict with one another, right?
Love that.
And so we're not asking people to assimilate to one another, fully align on every issue, but how do we come to work, understand we have differences, appreciate each other for our differences, but also not be offensive while being different.
I love that explanation. I'm bringing myself, because I've had some leaders in coaching them in manufacturing go, that's just the way I am. I'm like, well, is that self that you're bringing really helpful to everyone else? And maybe is there another way that, you can still be authentic, but not piss everybody off? Like, is there maybe another option there? So I like that analogy. One of your quotes that you introduced me to here, Rosalind Carter, and this goes around your work on Uplift and your coaching. A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. That's how you make me feel when I talk to you, Reggie. What's your advice to listeners out there of either the ones that aren't getting into the conversations or the ones that want to start the conversations? How do you do that?
I think it starts with courage. I mean, honestly, it takes courage to lean into a conversation. It takes a bit of curiosity as well. I believe in lifelong learning. And if I only engage people who believe what I believe, who think like I think, I don't think I'm ever going to learn anything new, because I'm never being challenged with a different framework, a different ideology, a different even theology, if you want, right?
Yeah.
But it's as we are willing to engage people, listen to different thoughts, different perspectives, that then we begin to grow, right? And so I just would encourage the listeners to become courageous, right? And step in, lean in, and it can start small.
That's what I was going to ask you. If you're a white male in a manufacturing plant, and whether it's women or a different race or color, and you are curious, how do you start small?
They can be awkward. Can I tell a story?
Please, we're all about story. We're not about lessons here. We're about stories. So let's go, Reggie.
So I spoke earlier about I had my own unconscious biases, and one in particular around the pride community. I grew up in rural Arkansas and did not know an openly gay person growing up. We had thoughts that some people may be, but no one, we're talking about in the 90s, like we just didn't know. And so when I met my wife and we got engaged, and she started to challenge me on some things, and it took some time. This didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like the first time she said something to me, I went, oh, that makes sense. Let me change the way I'm thinking and what I'm saying and the jokes that I'm making. It took me literally about 1.5 years, but at some point it resonated, it clicked, and I knew I wanted to grow and I wanted to change, and I didn't want to be the person that I was. And so there was a young man who I knew was openly gay. We had worked with each other in the same sector, but not, colleagues day to day. But I called him up one day and said, hey man, I'd love to have lunch. I want to propose something to you. And so can I buy you lunch and make the proposal? Right? And
Food always works.
Food always works, right? Let's break bread. And so we did. We met, and it was I didn't know how to even start the conversation, and I said, I may stick my foot in my mouth, but I hope you hear my heart. And I began to share. And when I finished, it was the greatest response I had ever felt in my life. He just said, Reggie, thank you. Thank you for being willing to, one, share and acknowledge your own stuff, but then that you're willing to approach me and ask me to help you understand more and, just walk with you on this. He is one of my dearest friends now. That was about 10 years ago, and literally one of my dearest friends. I'd be willing to fight for this dude.
So is that the concept of maybe just, hey, if you're in a majority in a plant and there is a minority, is it just a matter of saying, hey, I don't know where to start with this, but I know you're gay, and I'm just more curious on it, and I just don't know as much about it, and just want to know a little bit more about you, and how do I support? Is that, I don't know, I'm just practicing on this podcast.
No, right? So I grew up in the rural South, right?
Yeah.
Bible Belt. And I used to hear the old women in my church say, what's from the heart reaches the heart. And there's some truth to that, right? And I think if you are a person that's in the majority, in whatever capacity that is, right?
Yeah.
If you walk up to someone who might be a minority, I'll say for me, there are 90% men in my office and I decide I want to go approach this woman and ask her, what does it really feel like being a woman here? And to ask some deeper questions. I think most people, because what's from the heart reaches the heart, when they feel that sincerity from you, it's like my friend did to me. It's almost open arms.
Yeah.
As a black man, right? When my white friends have come to me, my white colleagues, Reggie, I want to ask you a question. I feel the sincerity, like, you know, because I've been asked that question where you're like, really, man? Are you serious right now? But like, you know what's sincere and what's authentic. My arms are always open. And I think most individuals are that way.
So you have a different approach of educating on diversity inclusion. And when I heard you speak the first time, I noticed a lot of people were paying attention, and you have a different style. How would you describe, and maybe this is something that the listeners are going to take on as well and learn from you, but you talked about like the condemning feeling. Maybe sometimes I'm afraid to say something because I'm going to say the wrong thing and I'm going to get condemned. What's your mindset around that?
Yeah, I appreciate you for asking that and even, I guess, feeling that and noticing that in the space. It's from a place of love. Again, I know I'm talking to manufacturers probably right now, but it's from a place of caring. My philosophy around it is, how can I challenge people to think differently, to consider something a different perspective, but challenge them without condemning them. So if someone says something that's, off color, could be considered offensive, I'm not trying to come in with a sledgehammer and make them feel horrible about what they said. I want to come in and typically ask questions that will cause them to think, that will have them contemplating over at least my challenge. They may not agree with me, but I hope they walk away at least with a mindset of going, man, I need to think about what he said. Because if I come in and I condemn you, you're not going to think about what you said or what I'm challenging you with. If I come in with a sawed-off shotgun, pow, 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 can't believe you said that.
I'm going to fire back, or I'm going to put my protection up.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Flight or fright. I didn't say flight, fight, or fright.
Fight or flight. Yeah, how we're making each other feel. So if you see someone that's maybe not being intentionally hurtful or biased, and so it's just approach from love. You gotta show me how much you care first before you tell me what you know or what you see. Use a question. That's another good nugget of how do you think that comment landed? Was that okay with everybody? What do you think?
Yeah.
and because sometimes we'll say a joke. I had a friend that I would joke about bacon because he was Muslim and they didn't eat pork, and I started joking with it, but then he's a super great guy, and we're still friends today. And then I really started asking, so why don't you eat pork? Right? And then he started talking to me about just the concept of the pigs and what kind of an animal they are, and then talking about fasting. And it's like, man, I got a degree from a friendship just on his values. And it was just like, and we had some family members that at the time that, maybe weren't so kind to other areas in Canada that were having different impacts. And it's kind of like, man, it's always, we label that exception, whether it's the white arrogant male, maybe it's just someone from another country, but it's like, man, if we have more conversations, let's kind of understand where you're coming from, man.
Proximity, right? At the end of the day, how proximate are you to people, their issues, whether it's immigration? Again, years ago, I was working in a nonprofit sector, and I'll tell you, at that moment that I was working for this, when I began working for this new company in a new area, you had asked me my thoughts on immigration, and this isn't a political statement. I was neither here nor there. I just didn't care one way or the other. It's not that serious for me. I just wish y'all could just not fight over this so much. And now I'm at a school that is 45% Latino, 30% African American, and the rest, to put it in perspective, there were 16 languages and 41 different dialects at this school. There were a number of kids from other countries, and I began to build relationships I got close to these students and their families. And one story in particular, and I'm going to keep this short, young lady who was amazing. She was the salutatorian of her class. Her parents brought her to America at the age of 3 illegally. But once she was here, she had to go to school. So she went from kindergarten to 12th grade with the dreams of becoming a school teacher. And when she came into her senior year and she's applying for scholarships and trying to go to college, she was told she has to go back to her home country. In order for you to go to school here, you got to go back to your home country. Well, what is her home country at this point, right?
They grew up here.
She grew up here. And I will say this, because of proximity and relationship, I can't sit on the fence on immigration. Now, I'm not saying the border should be wide open, but this idea that, you came here illegally, everybody has to go back. I'm just saying we're America.
Yeah.
Right? We have some of the smartest, most intelligent people. We should be able to figure out something, a win-win scenario. But it wasn't until I got proximate in relationship to people that I began to think differently, even have a consideration to say, what are the options? It can't just be zero sum or zero gain. Like, let's figure something out.
Yeah. More conversations and more exposure.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. So what feedback are you getting from manufacturing? You're having these conversations. You're going around to different organizations. What are you hearing, Reggie? What's the vibe you're getting?
Oh gosh, Trevor, it's all over the board, right? But I think I'm getting more positive feedback than negative. I'm hearing and seeing more people who want to see growth. They want the development. They are starting to realize, and diversity is a benefit to our organization. Diversity and inclusion actually enhances the culture. It's not a takeaway. It's not a subtraction, but it is truly an addition. And I'm starting to see and hear that. And it's honestly is exciting. It's so exciting and motivating to me as someone who's very passionate about this work. And going back to, as a child, I wanted to change the world and see the world be a better place. And this can actually happen through manufacturing companies, right? Who, let's be honest, I think when people think about inclusion and diversity, they don't think about manufacturing companies. They think about tech companies, and they think about West Coast, and they don't think about a manufacturing company. I think most people, when they think about a manufacturing company, it's more of the same. We're not promoting, we're not developing, we're not cultivating a spirit of diversity and inclusion. But I think manufacturing companies have the opportunity to change America and thus change the world.
I love it. And we're on the same mission here on manufacturing. We know it's a low engagement rate, one of the lowest industries engagement rate. We know we need people, right? So it isn't like, it's yes, we're going to keep growing the skill that we have in manufacturing, and we can fill some of those spots that everyone's struggling with, and the talent and getting people to move around. And I would go in blocks of 5 years and never leave a building. Like, I'd be in that building for 5 years. So I don't even get exposed to different cultures and diversity. It's just who we happen to hire. And I know when we had Nicole on here in one of the episodes talking about women in manufacturing, she made it very clear. It's you got to start with who you're bringing into the organization and start at those roots. And who are you attracting? And you need positions where people can say, I could see myself in that role. So I agree with that whole philosophy of it starts with that integration conversations. But man, when I'm thinking back in southern Ontario in the middle of nowhere, and I'm working at this plant, we weren't having conversations on it. and now it's being brought more to light. But I love the fact of, hey man, if you're in a rural area, or if you're in an outset manufacturing plant, bring in those conversations. What is the truth in your organization? So how do we get there to the truth in an organization that's maybe not a big corporation, and there's medium and small size, and maybe they're listening today? How do they get to their truth?
How do you get to your truth? I think it starts with acknowledgement. So even in this work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I have a framework called ABIDE, A-B-I-D-E. Everybody in the world, the DEI world, knows the B-I-D-E, right? Belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equity. I'm convinced it starts with just the A of it, acknowledgement. It's like, the 12-step program. It really is. Until you acknowledge that you have a problem, until you can acknowledge that maybe I have some biases, until I can acknowledge, even as a company, that I'm in rural whatever part of the country or North America, can I acknowledge that I can do something differently here? And I think this diversity and inclusion doesn't happen without intentionality. You know, people will talk about quotas, but here's my deal. If you know that your company has no women or very little women or very little people of color, that's not a quota for you to say, we want more diversity. And we're going to be intentional about it. It starts with intentionality. We have to face where we are, look at the data, acknowledge the data, and then say, what can we do to change it? Yes, it starts with a conversation, but it doesn't end with a conversation. It ends with action. And the action is to do something different.
And when we just stay in our own comfort zones in our space, I believe that we naturally just gravitate to people that think like we do.
It's comfortable.
It's comfortable. It's easy. And when I met you, it's kind of like, okay, I'm like, okay, I need to ask Reggie more questions, and this is an opportunity I'm running this podcast, wanting to have a different influence, and man, I'm afraid to get it wrong. Like, am I going to say the wrong comment? Do I describe someone the wrong way? And maybe it's just, I think what I'm taking away from our conversation is if they know you're coming from the right place. And one of our first episodes here from Andrew DeHunt was all around, do you care about me? It all starts with that. And if I know you care about me, you can get away with a lot. You can get away with a lot.
Right? It's about us. Fundamentally, I think diversity and inclusion within an organization, the foundation of it is relationships and trust. Let's be honest. A lot of people work together, but they don't have a relationship. And, people talk about working relationships. People can work together and not really have a relationship beyond, like, let's accomplish our goals. And they don't trust each other. I see this quite a bit, but as we develop relationships with intentionality, cultivate trust, now when you misstep or I misstep, we have a level of trust that it's like my wife. Like, I misstep quite a bit with her, right? But we've established a level of trust that she knows that my heart isn't like to hurt her. But I may still say something crazy at times, and she's willing to address that and forgive me, right? And I think the same thing can happen in the workspace.
Yeah, we have that foundation where we can lean into a topic, and we can't just jump into it either, right? It's got to take some time. And hey, do you genuinely care with your curiosity? What's your intent to lean into this? But I speaking of intentionality, whatever we do, if we're not thinking a little bit different, and if you're listening to this podcast, you got to walk away just thinking about it tomorrow. And I talked to someone that was at one of Reggie's workshops, and his comment was, I go through a lot of different conversations and leadership talks, and it's different with this one. I was just left thinking a little bit more about my own self-awareness and my own thoughts. And I think if we can all do that for each other, and you take this away from the podcast, what would be the one message, the takeaway that you would ask our listeners to do today, Reggie?
I would ask that they consider what is their diversity and inclusion stories. Whether you're man, woman, black, white, able-bodied, wherever you are in life, wherever you are in your company, what is your diversity and inclusion story? And we have the opportunity to be an advocate, to be on the right side of history. I really do believe that. Developing and cultivating a diverse and inclusive culture and environment is the right side of history. And so I would just encourage everyone to think about that. Like, what am I doing to make my company a better place, a safe place, physically and psychologically for my colleagues? And so that would be my challenge.
So what I'm hearing, Reggie, is that your personal story just comes from your own personal conversations.
Yeah, personal conversations that I believe this, personal conversations ultimately lead into personal action.
Ooh.
Right? The conversations that I had with my wife led to an action of me calling now a friend. At the moment, I wouldn't say this person was a friend, but that conversation led to an action that led to an action that has led to me now challenging others and having conversations with others that I believe will lead to conversations and actions and actions and conversations and actions and actions.
Well, I'm inspired. I'm on a roll, Reggie. You've made me feel uncomfortable, and you've made me feel like, I guess, more equipped. I feel more equipped to maybe lean into some conversations that maybe before I wouldn't have. And so thank you for that. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.